right.
Excited to be here.
This works.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Works. Cool. Yeah, excited to be here with you, Adrian, today. Quick intros. I'm Nikhil. I lead product at the Wormhole Foundation.
Yeah, I'm Adrian. I'm one of the co-founders of Anoma.
Great. And yeah, this is just going to be a quick conversation on interoperability, Anoma, Intents, unifying the Ethereum and crypto ecosystem. And so to kick us off, Adrian, we'd love to just get a quick overview. What is Anoma?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to think of Anoma is a distributed operating system. It is a way to defragment liquidity, to defragment state between sort of the Ethereum main chain, all the different rollups that exist in the ecosystem now, by giving developers a unified stack that they can develop against, so that I, as a developer, user, don't have to make the choice, do I go to X, do I go to Y, do I go to the main chain? This is much rather now becoming a choice of what does a specific user want to do at runtime. But at the same time, it means that as a user, I can say, well, today actually I don't mind, I'd like to be on Arbitrum or Optimism or the Ethereum main chain, just give me whatever is the quickest, fastest.
Yeah, thanks for the overview. And I'm curious, as someone who is building Anoma, who's involved in this stuff every day, when you look at the high level, why are intense protocols really valuable? What are the main challenges in the crypto ecosystem that you're aiming to solve or that they can solve?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. I think intents have been all around us for a long time, just no one thinks of them as intents. Because fundamentally what an intent is, right? An intent is a partial state transition. It is, I have A for B, and I do not yet know who has B for A. And this could also mean there's one counterparty, there's multiple counterparties, there's maybe 1,000 counterparties, maybe a pool involved, maybe a number of other chains. But fundamentally, most of the activity on all of our systems right now is about decentralized counterparty discovery. Like, I have a partial thing, and I'd like to find someone else that can help me fulfill what I want to, for example, trade. But even a rollup is a very good example of an intent-centric system. Because when you think of what is a rollup, well, it's like users have individual state transitions, partial state transitions, that get combined into whole compute that then get settled somewhere else, right? So intents have always been around. I think until now, we've just been lacking generalized intent infrastructure. Anoma really is, with the Anoma resource machine, the first generalized intent infrastructure, so that you can build whatever, and all these intents are just composable. Whether you want to build a multi-sig abstraction, something like Gnosis Safe, or you want to build a trading protocol, intents are just always going to be the right abstraction here. And by having a generalized intent framework, you get this composability. The other aspect is that, especially with ZK, a lot of state moves to edge devices, and all of a sudden for edge devices, intents are just the right abstraction, because currently we live in this world where transaction updates some amount of global state that all lives in the middle and we all share. But with zero-knowledge proofs, state moves to edge devices, and all of a sudden you need to have the ability to make partial state updates. You need to be able to express partial state updates over data on the edge device. And so I think intents are this inevitable abstraction that is just going to come to all these systems, because it's just an easier way to represent what users actually have at the moment.
Very cool. Intents are everywhere, and intents are inevitable. Inevitable. Yeah. And you mentioned the Anoma resource machine. I'm curious if you could dive into that a little bit more. What is the ARM? How does it integrate with the EVM? Maybe what are some differences, similarities? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so right now we live in the world of VMs. Everything is VM-centric, right? And so, for example, the EVM is a great example of a virtual machine. And these are sort of imperative compute that executes transactions sequentially. And then intent machines do not replace virtual machines, right? Like the Anoma resource machine or the ARM does not replace the EVM. It is fundamentally something that runs on top of the EVM. That sort of the intent machine, the Anoma resource machine is really the first generalized intent machine. And so the ARM is deployed on top of the EVM in order to expose this abstraction to developers of that is like an operating system, where you have a bunch of operating system APIs that you can use to build applications in terms of intents. And this then gets combined with the Anoma P2P stack and sort of hooks together all these separate deployments of the ARM, whether they live on Optimism, on Arbitrum, on Ethereum main chain, right? And I think this is sort of the important thing to understand. The other thing here with the ANOMA resource machine and ANOMA as a whole, there's no ANOMA chain that you must interact with. If you want to use ANOMA just on Ethereum, you can just use a P2P stack. It's permissionless infrastructure. You never have to touch sort of any other system. Even though ANOMA is deployed there, you can just use intents, generalized intents on Ethereum using ANOMA.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then that's also kind of a smooth transition into something else I want to talk about is you also touched on the experience of integrating with ANOMA, right? And whenever there's new tech, a couple things are top of mind. One of the things that's top of mind is what does the developer experience for the new tech look like? How are you thinking about the developer experience for ANOMA, building on ANOMA? And maybe if you could touch on also, what are some of the hurdles to adoption that you're going to face?
Yeah, so I think the first big notion that people need to understand is like it's not building on ANOMA, it's you building with ANOMA. It's not like, this is not another intermediary that tries to extract rent from, sort of like be an intermediary that you must send things to, right? Like you're building with ANOMA. Hopefully this is an improvement on sort of like the dev UX or user UX. I think one of the big challenges with anything new is you need to be where the valuable state is, right? And like right now, fundamentally, like 95% of most valuable state is on Ethereum. So like, how can you be backwards compatible with existing valuable state in our existing ecosystem? It is very difficult to say, and like even rollups don't actually solve this to a large extent because you still like, you have to move state from like the main chain to a rollup. So I think a big challenge is how do you bring valuable tech to where where the valuable state already is. And I think we definitely saw this in the past with the L1 wars, where it's like, well, come to my new shiny thing and bring your valuable state with you. That's a very difficult proposition to developers because the state is actually like the valuable state. That's like the fundamental core proposition. It's not like where the contracts live. It's where the state lives and where the state is secured. So it's really about bringing ANOMA to developers where the state is already, where the valuable state already exists, rather than having to say, well, like let's try this new thing and like move all the valuable state to my new shiny thing. The other aspect is also if you have to move all valuable state, you end up in a world where you have like really hard times around network effects because you need to convince a lot of valuable state to move over. And this is one of the very nice things with ANOMA. It's like it's just a better abstraction or like an easier to use abstraction for you where your state already is. And I think, yeah, this is really the main challenge around a lot of this like deployment tech. It's like, and I think to some extent it's a shame. It's like we should be like thinking about how do we collaboratively make our industry a better like developer experience, kind of put them into a better future rather than like, oh, come to my shiny new thing, like, and like building in these like weird silos.
Yeah, and that's also another good transition into the other kind of thing that I think is usually top of mind for whenever you build new tech, which is how does it compose with everything else that's already out there in crypto? How does it compose with the rest of the ecosystem? How do you think about composability while building ANOMA? I'm also curious, you know, talking about intents, how you're thinking about composing with existing interoperability protocols, you know, like Wormhole, for example.
Yeah, so, okay, there's a couple of things to this, right? So the first thing is composability sort of at the application, at the machine layer. And ANOMA has two levels of composability. It has the intent level composability, where as a user you don't necessarily have to say anymore, well, I want to trade against Uniswap. You can just say, I want to trade. I don't care on which specific market this gets executed, which specific application on Ethereum this gets executed on. That's level 1 composability. And then level 2 composability is that you can treat all deployments of ANOMA across the ecosystem as one unified intent machine. That as a user you can even say, well, not only do I not care which specific application I trade against, I don't actually even care which specific chain I'm getting settled on. So like I can go, you know, today, Optimism, Arbitrum, Ethereum main chain, just give me the quickest, fastest thing. And these are sort of the two, and honestly, this is, I think, going to be the single biggest unlock since sort of like we moved from Bitcoin to Ethereum in terms of enabling truly scalable composability. And like we'll probably see like a 10x improvement in both liquidity, efficiency here, just because all of a sudden a lot of these systems become, and applications aren't siloed anymore, but can rather compose with each other. I think the other aspect that you mentioned around sort of the multi-chain ecosystem, how does Wormhole fit in, how do the interoperability systems fit in? ANOMA is very agnostic to this, right? Like whether someone wants to use Wormhole to route some assets from Ethereum to Solana, this is really fundamentally user choice. And like, if all users want to make this choice, great. They should do this. Anoma is very agnostic to this. Anoma is very agnostic to saying you must use this specific interoperability stack. I think I have personal opinions around this and sort of like trust minimized bridging and so on that I think hopefully we'll get to long term. But fundamentally, like with Anoma, it's a user choice. Do they want to use Wormhole? Do they want to use something like IBC? Whatever is available on these systems, developers and users can use.
Makes sense. Switching gears a little bit, I'm curious to know from you, what are maybe some of the exciting apps that you want to see built on Anoma? What are some of the major use cases of intents that you think are out there that are low-hanging fruit or not low-hanging fruit, just things you want to see solved?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question on like the realistic perspective of like what does the industry currently do versus sort of like what do I want to see in the future, right? I think what I would really like to see is, especially with Anoma, how can we leverage Anoma to solve shared sequencing between all the our rollup ecosystem? I think this is a incredibly big challenge that right now fragments a lot of liquidity and a lot of dev attention. And so I think this is sort of like on the infrastructure layer. If Anoma can do its part to defragment the liquidity, to provide very good composability across many of these different L2s and L1s in the ecosystem, that'd be a big win to me. Specific in terms of a very practical application, what I'd like to see is privacy-preserving order book exchanges that are actually decentralized, right? Like right now, everything is running mostly in someone else's server. Like when you look at a lot of the rollups, like there's always this central coordination point at the moment, and I'd like to see us move away from this going forward. So I'm very excited also having the ability to privately trade that like, with Anoma you have the ability to have information flow control so users can decide, well, I want to attach a zero knowledge proof to my trade or my intent. You don't want to do this, you want to attach a plain text signature. Those two things are still composable. So you can build very scalable sort of like cross L2, cross L1 dexes that are going to be incredibly liquid. And I think at that point you actually can start competing sort of with the centralized exchanges that we have at the moment. Long term, I'd like to see scale-free money. I think scale-free money is a cool economics experiment of like everyone issues their own local token that represents their economic trust graph. And then we can have like these incredibly complex webs of economic interactions, but they will map much better into the actual economic realities because like I don't want to see my environment polluted where I locally live, so I can price this into the asset I'm issuing, right? And so all of a sudden, with scale-free money, this is fundamentally something that needs this like heterogeneous trust model that Anoma has and the intent model. And so I hope to see scale-free money. I think it will take a couple of years to get there, but eventually this will get very cool, I think.
Super cool. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. I want to also ask you, as a founder of multiple different things, what are some of the biggest learnings you've had just generally working in this industry, bringing these visions to life? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced, learnings you've had?
A lot of people don't like to read. This is sort of the biggest learning. Really, like, if you want to get ahead, spend the next 3 months just reading, and you'll be at like the top 1%. It's ridiculous, even like, especially in the distributed systems area, like how a lot of people in the space like to think that they're distributed systems engineers, and like they really haven't caught up with like the research literature that's like was pumped out in the last 30 years out of universities. So I think this is the most surprising thing to me. Like, I like to read, and it's like, I think people should read more.
Read specifically distributed systems.
Even like blog posts, like just like spend 3 months like deeply trying to understand by reading 6 hours a day on like what is the state of the field. And you'll be at the top 1% because most people currently get the content from like 10 thread long Twitter threads. Like that's it. Like this is like, you're missing a lot of depth there, I think. So that's, I think, one thing. So I can recommend everyone in the space, like just like build prototypes, read things, and you'll be ahead pretty quickly. The other thing, I think we move in these cycles where it's like every once in a while, the marketing gets ahead of sort of like what's technically realistic, and it's like just be aware of this, right? Like don't try to chase like the latest narrative. Really like deeply think about the problems you're trying to solve, because only if you actually solve meaningful problems can we make meaningful progress to like make something better. And I think even especially right now, a lot of attention gets absorbed by sort of like patchwork solutions, because people go like, well, I want to have something that works in the next 3 months. It's like, that's good, but every once in a while you also got like, okay, like what's the fundamental unlock? And I mean, this is like, to a large extent what happened with Ethereum after Bitcoin. It's like, what's the, like, let's not have another patchwork thing here, but like, let's do the fundamental unlock thing to enable a new set of use cases. And I think this is also very much something that we've been trying to achieve with Anoma.
Thanks. Read and don't chase narratives. Thanks, Adrian. We're right on the dot. Enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, so who's going first?
You go first.
All right. Thank you so
you
much.
You test it out. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Another round of applause,
あり
please.
がとうございました。
Woo. Oh, yeah, you
大
could
きな
sit.
拍手をお願いします。
All right.
ありがとうございました。
Yeah, it actually is pretty steep. Drum roll, please. Oh, ayo.
可愛い音で入水。
ちょっとポトンポトンって。
ラーメンボウルに入っていただきました。さあ
All
続いて。
right. All right, Nikhil.
それ。
Oh my God.
おーはい、ありがとうございました。